Allianz. Supporting all 32 counties through the Allianz Leagues.
Hello and welcome to the Tyrone Independent.ie's GA podcast in association with Allianz. I'm Will Slattery, delighted to be coming back to you ahead of the opening weekend of the Allianz Football League, and joining me for our preview chat today is Donegal, Boyle and Clerkin. Guys, how are things?
Great, Will. How are you? Looking forward to everything?
Yeah, no, good. Great to have you here.
Haircut and training last night, Will.
Oh no, yeah, brilliant. It's good to be back, isn't it?
Haircut and training last night, so quite happy.
Yeah, no, it's great to have football back finally, and a bit of a different format this year in the league. The four divisions have been split into North and South. Division 1, for instance, we have Division 1 North with Armagh, Donegal, Monaghan and Tyrone, and then Division 1 South with Dublin, Galway, Kerry and Roscommon. And Dick, I suppose it's great to have football back generally, but in terms of the new format, you know, does it change how you're looking at the league going into later in the summer? How are you approaching it?
No, it's funny. I was doing a podcast with somebody from Donegal last night, and we obviously were very focused on the northern side of things, and Donegal, Monaghan, and that dynamic with Tyrone as well, and Armagh. It'd be very interesting, Will, like with all the talk about new structures and what the future state of the championship and league and all has to happen. Like, it'd be a very interesting experiment, this new format, because if you sort of think about it, it's taken the best of the league in that you need a league format with the top teams, but then you're sort of equally getting that local rivalry bit in with that as well. So it'd be very interesting to see how it plays out and how well it goes down, because I'm just looking at this Ulster group, you know, Armagh, Donegal, Monaghan, Tyrone, which will be great. It's like a wee mini round robin Ulster championship. And, you know, if it's proven to be a success, will it maybe give people a bit of a think in terms of how the league and championship can merge long term? Obviously, you're pushed into this situation at the minute, but is it something to think about longer term in terms of how we can restructure things? So there's great games. Like, I'm just looking at the sequence of games here in this Division 1 North group. Each of them is like a championship game in their own right. And I genuinely think teams will go at these hammer and tongs, because you have 3 weeks, you have literally 2 weeks, you've got the space of 14 days, you've got the 3 games played, and then you're straight into championship. So there's going to be no soft starting. You got to find form, you got to hold your jersey, you got to try and get your jersey, because the summer will be over as quick as it'll start if you don't.
Yeah, Donegal, few interesting points Dick raises. First one, I thought that I hadn't really considered much, because I was just looking at the league more of this was kind of a structure of convenience given the nature of the year and COVID and travel and stuff like that. But he points out, you know, especially with that northern group, the rivalries that are built in there. Could this be maybe a long-term way of kind of rejigging things, changing it up a bit?
I suppose, like everything, we're going to know a lot more in a fortnight's time when the thing is run off. But I suppose what is added to it, particularly in the Division 1 North group, it's very local and it's very tribal, and it will add a little bit more to the thing. Of course, you have a lot riding on it in terms of the staying up, which I think is going to be huge, because it won't take a whole lot for a team, maybe even a team that's fancy to do something, maybe to start slow, which maybe you've seen some of the big teams do over the last couple of years. If you start slow here and maybe you're out 6 days again later, and and then all of a sudden you're under pressure and you're sort of like you're looking over your shoulder, the possibility of going down. So yeah, in terms of the structure going forward, I don't know. I think we've just been sort of trying to survive over the last couple of seasons, just trying to run competitions, get as many games as you can into a limited window. Not everyone's happy. That was never going to be the case. It was just impossible to fit in all the things that everyone wanted, like, for example, a backdoor in the football championship. But look, I think when we do emerge from this, and maybe this time next year, when we're up and running, hopefully in a league as we know it, I think we will have learned a few things about what we want our league and our championship to look like. Obviously, there's a vote coming on that in special Congress later on this year, if and when that gets organised. So look, it's as they say, don't waste a crisis, and I think we will come out and we'll know a bit more about what will the structures will look like over the next couple of years after this league and championship campaign.
Yeah, so it's one of the subplots that's worth keeping an eye on, I suppose, is just in terms of how the structure itself plays out, independent of how teams perform. And Dick, you kind of mentioned that you think teams will go at it hard. You kind of look at how Galway, when they came back after lockdown, lost a bit of momentum in that league just before the championship. It's a similarly tight lead-in time this year. So it is crucial for teams not to, get off to a bad start and have that kind of fester, given the championship is so close to the league.
Because you don't have time. Like you can't sort of take how teams might have approached the league and then into championship in years gone by, because it's such a gap. Like you're talking February, March, April, and then you mightn't be back playing championship till June, and you'll be back playing with your club. Like that's gone. So this notion of we'll ease into the league and ramp up to the championship because that was okay 5 years ago, or even 2 or 3 years ago. Like that is just not the case this year. You have to be going well, because you've literally got, you have your 3 weeks, not even 3 weeks, it's 14 days of your 3 games, and then very quickly you'll be jumping into championship. So as a player, whatever, but a manager a player needs to find form. He needs to sort of dust down the cobwebs of COVID very quickly. Young players need to try and get a hold of a jersey and prove themselves very quickly, because there's so few opportunities to do that. You don't have a break to go and play club football and shine there. You got to do it. Like there's a lot of young players in the Monaghan camp will be looking to try and squeeze in there. So they got to do that in Enniskillen against Armagh. They got to do it in Ballybuffet against Donegal, or they got to do it in Omagh against Tyrone. No easy places to go and play at the best of times. So, I think if players don't, they could find the summer's over for them as quickly as it started. So, and different teams have different dynamics because they know what they're facing into from a championship point of view. Ulster is always the case that you can't look too far forward beyond the first round. So, I think there'll be a sharp focus. And as you've already said, very fine line between staying up and going down, which no team wants to do.
Yeah, and Donnchadh, in terms of talking points or teams, like who are you looking at going into this Division 1 campaign? Who are you interested to see, or who do you think it's a big campaign for, with an eye on later in the year?
I think it's huge for Kerry. I think, like by some distance, they're the team that you maybe, if you go back to last year, they came through Division 1, both sides of the Division 1 campaign. They looked quite comfortable. And looked like they were in a really good spot. And then they get chinned by Cork in the way that they did. And Peter Keane was talking about it the other day. I think they expected themselves to have a much different championship than they actually did. So I think to see what they do, what they come with, what their personnel are like, have they changed much? I think one of the interesting things about this shortened championship for a league and championship over the last 2 years is it doesn't give the chase and pack a whole pile of time to try and close the gap. So I actually think the structure of the thing suits Dublin. I think it suits the Limerick Hurlers. I think it suits the teams at the very top of the tree, because there's not much to go on. There's not much time to build momentum, to build a game plan, maybe to tighten up on things you want. Whereas if you're already at that place and you're operating at a really high level in the way Dublin and Limerick are, I think they're in a better position at the minute. But I think Kerry are the obvious ones. They will come with a point to prove. You'd expect them to hit the ground running. And then, as far as I know, I think the draw is set up in such a way that we could conceivably have the Leinster champions and the Munster champions in an order final. So that that is one to look at. But I think Kerry are the team to watch. The other thing about the league is, particularly when you go further down the pecking order, the league is more or less everything for those teams. Because if you look at maybe just having a quick look at, say, the Leinster Championship draw, and either Wicklow or Wexford have Dublin, so their league campaigns are pretty much their entire season. So, Wicklow and Wexford, if they can look about promotion, that would be, I would imagine, that is almost all of their what they're aiming for this season. For a lot of teams, that's the case as well. Straight knockout, they don't stand a whole pile of chance, say, in the provincial championships. That's, and even allowing for what Cavan did last year and what Tipperary did. But you still have to think that for those teams, the league is going to be absolutely everything. So I think there are teams to watch as well, the ones that maybe have got a very difficult draw in the championship. I think you'll see them putting all their eggs in that basket.
And Dick, in terms of Kerry, as Donegal mentioned there, like how big a league is it for them? How big a year is it for them after how they exited against Cork last year?
Listen, it had to have been a very difficult winter for them. I was a sore wound to have to lick. Like they know they just were complacent, they were slack, and they got caught, and there was no comeback, there was no back door, and they'll just have had to suck that up and try and come into this year in a good frame of mind. Listen, they have the panel, they have the talents, they have to figure out how to sort of get the best of David Clifford, and he is the talisman to sort of bring them to an All-Ireland title. Let's not dance around. He's that good and he's that important to it. To them, they need to. There's certain areas of the pitch that they need to improve on. You know, they need to lock down a good, solid, reliable midfield pairing and a consistent pairing. They need to figure out how they want to play their football. Do they want to play a traditional attacking, expressive Kerry brand, or balance it? You know, I think they got caught in two minds too often, and it cost them in All-Ireland a couple of years ago when they didn't just go out and beat Dublin when they had them on the ropes. So they need to find their own way. They need to find the way that those players can go out and play with the confidence that Dublin play with. And like, people talk about resources, they talk about players, they talk about all this stuff. Like, I had the privilege of going down to watch Dublin 3 times last year in the empty stadiums, and it was a different experience than watching them in a full Croke Park with all the noise and the distraction. Like, and you got to appreciate the intensity and the focus and the pure confidence that they play with on the pitch, Will. And I've never seen another team play like that. And it doesn't matter who they're playing. Whether it's Westmeath, whether it's Cavan or it's Kerry, they just go out and do the thing. They back their tactics, they back themselves, and they play off the front foot. You know, so if a Kerry, a Mayo, a Donegal, a Tyrone, a Monaghan, any of these teams want to beat Dublin, they have to bring that confidence that they Dublin bring, because that's what keeps them up at that top level of consistency. And other teams just can't get up to there, and I think that's not always just ability. It's just not backing themselves and backing the talent that they all many of them have in the ranks.
Yeah, and Donegal, just on Dublin, like, does the absence of Dessie Farrell now for this league campaign from the touchline, like, is that a kind of a any chink in their armour now, not having their manager there, their kind of their general? I know it's, you know, he'll be back for championship, but even in terms of preparation across the years, am I overthinking it or overreading it? No,
to be honest, I think that's minimal, and it goes back to what I was saying beforehand. Like, there's just such an experienced group to know exactly what they have to do. They know exactly what it takes to perform at the level they've been performing at. So Dessie missing until the championship, you know, it's next door to irrelevant, if not quite irrelevant. The other thing about Dublin is, in fairness to them, they will not expect a game of any significance until the All-Ireland semi-final, which is, what are we now? We're in mid-May. That's going to come around maybe late July, I think, maybe August. So they have loads of time to get things right. You would expect them, even at half speed, to stay up in Division 1 and cruise through Leinster again. So they're a long way off. Like, they will be looking to peak for that stage of the game. So they're actually in a very strong position in terms of the league and the championship. They can use it. You'll still expect them to pick up enough points to stay up. They have Wicklow or Wexford in the first round, and go on from there. And everyone in Leinster will be grist to the mill like they've been for the last while. And then come the All-Ireland semi-final, they have to be right. So I think they're in a really strong position again. And it's going back to the point I made earlier, with no one having time to try and close the gap and tweak things and maybe get a little bit stronger. I think it suits the likes of Dublin and the very strong teams at the minute.
Yeah, Dick, it's interesting on Dublin and Donnacha's point that the format suited them, because I suppose last year you're looking at no Jack McCaffrey, you know, Paul Mannion was minimal, he only came on in the final off the bench, but they only had to play, you know, Mayo as well, a Division 1 side in the final, or Meath were as well. They had been relegated in the Leinster final but didn't give them much of a test, so they didn't actually have to play that many good teams, or top teams rather, to get another All-Ireland.
No, and that's, you know, Donegal, as I already said, that's going to be the case. But I'm just looking, I wouldn't be surprised if maybe Dessie Farrell, they're almost looking at this league as being more important than the Leinster Championship, because, you know, look at the games they have to play, right? Let's not to be unfair to Roscommon. You'd have fancy taking that. They have to go to Thurles to play Kerry, because they've lost home advantage. So no home games, remember. I'm on the same boat, right? So let's say Kerry turn Dublin over in Thurles. They have to then go to Tuam and beat Galway in Tuam to avoid a relegation playoff, possibly, which could be against a Tyrone or a Donegal. So they could very easily, with not doing an awful lot wrong, losing a tight game against Donegal in Tuam, find themselves in a relegation playoff against an Ulster team would just love nothing more than sink them into Division 2. So forget about Leinster. They're going to cakewalk through that. But they'll not want to, for some reason, get off to a bad start in the year. So I think, to put that to bed quickly, they'll want to get off to a good start and not having any potential of a relegation playoff or anything like that. Will Dessie Farrell, will the management on the sideline? No, because by the time it matters, he'll be back. Let's be honest. But they'll just want to tidy up what they need to do early on to avoid something very, very obscure possibly happening, which, I think you're going to see a few surprises now with the way that structure is in terms of a team that might find themselves dipping down into Division 2 they didn't expect it. And Dublin certainly won't want to get caught up in that.
Yeah, Dick, and in terms of your own county, Monaghan, the disrupted preparations, again, similar to Dublin with the COVID bans, do you think it'll have an impact in Monaghan?
Well, at a very simple level, similar to what I was saying with Dublin, they've lost home advantage, they've 3 away games effectively. If you believe the stats and they're borne out in terms of the home advantage and what it brings you, they've lost that. They have to go to Ballybuffet, they have to go to Omagh, and they now have to go to Enniskillen to play Armagh. So it's not easy for them. It's not going to be easy for them at all. Massive game against Armagh in the first one. If you can get that, all they'll have to do is get a result in either of the other two. But it's really tough. That opening group like Armagh will be coming up looking to, they've been too far out of the top tier, and that they'll want to make an impression. They didn't do themselves justice, I don't think, against Donegal last year in the championship. So McGeaney will be looking to, they've good talent at Armagh, they've good young players, so they're coming to their milk and they'll want to show that they're able to compete. A lot of different dynamics going on there with Tyrone, new management, all these players that they're expecting now are going to break out of the constraints that Mickey Hart were putting on them, whether that was true or not. So it'll be interesting to see what they bring. And Donegal will obviously, no more so than Kerry, had a long winter to lick their wounds over that Cavan defeat. So a lot of different things at play in Division 1.
Yeah, Donegal is an interesting one.
I think I was just going to say, I think Donegal are in an interesting one as well, because we've been talking about them for a couple of years, as in, you're looking in, you think, right, they have all the raw materials there. They have really good players, like nationally renowned players in almost every line. They seem to produce a good, steady flow of talented young guys that we think, they'll add something, Oisín Gallen, these fellas. And then yet now, for a couple of years now, when it's come to a game that was going to make or break their season, they've kind of just fallen short. And that hasn't gone unnoticed, I don't think, within the county itself. We've got a really good bunch here. We still have Michael Murphy moving well. We need to make some impression here. So I'd be very interested to see what they come up with this time around. Again, they're in such a tight spot with straight into the Ulster Championship and that 4-team group, which is effectively a mini Ulster Championship in Division 1 North. They're in a difficult spot, but I still think they have. I wonder what Dick thinks about it, but I think they have all the raw materials to be a very top side.
Yeah, they do. They've been probably a wee bit unfortunate with different players at different times, either picking up injuries in clutch games. Paddy McBrairty was obviously if they can keep him fit, and he's such a talent, but really we haven't seen the best of him for a number of years now. And he's a marquee forward on his own in any team, and Donegal have been doing well largely in his absence. So if they can get him in, Michael Murphy, yes, going well, but he's a lot of years now. They need other guys to be able to step up. And if you can go back to, I don't know if any of you were at the game, not last year, the year before, down in Castlebar against Mayo, where let's be honest, none of the rest of the guys stood up. Michael Murphy tried to do it himself and he couldn't do it. He nobody else around him was able to deliver. So they need a Paddy, they need some of these guys to have that leadership quality in tight games that they've slipped up in the last few years, that they should have been winning. They should not have been losing against Cavan last year. They'll know that. But there wasn't a player to stand up and grab that game by the scruff of the neck that other teams have in tight spots. So listen, there's talent there, but they got to get it out in the pitch. They got to get it out in the pitch, fit and fresh, and be able to compete when it matters. And just too often over the last couple of years, they haven't been able to do that.
Yeah, like one statistic that kind of illustrates how they've kind of stumbled at the latter stages of the championship. They haven't played in an All-Ireland semi-final since the day they beat Dublin back in 2014, which, you know, Dublin are going for 7 in a row this year. Like, so it shows just how long it's been since they were in the Final Four. Yeah. What about Tyrone then, Donegal? Like, I think, as Dick kind of alluded to earlier, the new management team, there is an expectation that perhaps some of their forward potential could be unlocked in a more incisive way, potentially. Like, is that overblown, you know, or do you think that's actually a reality, that it could be a more offensive style of play?
Well, that sort of narrative, it does fall in line with what, you know, certain people would have been saying about Tyrone for the last while. I remember Sean Cavanagh made that point. He said, look, I'm in training every night. It's come back a few years from training. And he says, we have some of the best forwards in Ulster. And, you know, maybe between one thing and another, between fellas dropping in and out of panels, between the style of play, maybe we never quite got to see exactly what they were talking about. The expectation now seems to be that somehow they'll be let off the leash and, you know, that it'll just be all expansive, free-flowing stuff. I think that's a bit unrealistic, to be honest, because, you know, none of the top teams play like that. I think they all have a very much, they have a very steady base to walk off and to go from there. So I think you will see something like that. But you will see a shift in style, I think. And you will see maybe them trying to play a little bit more expansively, but it won't be just gung-ho stuff overnight. But it will be very interesting because they do produce a lot of talent and fellas we talk about. Like, you know, I've seen Ronan O'Neill be one of those forwards now, and he's around a long time, but he's sort of dropped in and out of the panel every now and again. But I've seen him do things playing football, and you think, geez, he's a complete natural. Like, you know, he's an absolute, you know, classic inside forward, very classy, very, you know, stylish on the ball. Maybe his face didn't fit for whatever reason, or maybe, you know, there's less room or forgiveness for those guys in inter-county football. But you would think that, you know, the likes of him will get more of a chance now to maybe flourish in this setup. That's certainly the expectation. The reality now, it'll be interesting to see. I'm actually going to Oman Saturday night for Donegal and Tyrone, so I'm looking forward to seeing both those teams and Tyrone in particular, just to see what they look like, because they, as we've mentioned already, it won't have a whole lot of time to bed in. So whatever they're trying to do and whatever their style of play is going to be, it's going to be on show on Saturday night.
Yeah, I think just to focus on Tyrone slightly, like Darragh Canavan, Conor McKenna, and whether Cathal Machine is back fit. I haven't heard, unless you have heard any update on his progress. Like, it was last August he got the operation. August, September, October, November, May. You'd like to think that he should be back fit if he's moving forward. Like, each of those players on their own are potential marquee forwards. Like Darragh Canavan, like we know what talent he has. He's just, can he make the step up to senior level? And you know, can they find a place to fit him, a Conor McKenna, a Cathal, and then you've got all the other supporting acts around them. Like, there is the raw materials and the talent, and there's no doubt about it. But it's getting them all to fit and gel, get the best out of them. You have Lee Brennan, you've got Mark Bradley, you've the Donnellys, obviously. So there's no end of talent up there. It's just getting them to fit, getting them all to work together, but equally having a good, solid, competitive defensive shape, which is a must as well. So
I remember covering a game up there where they had Matty Donnelly and Sean Cavan as a two-man full forward line. You know, so that would be, I think that kind of spoke to maybe Mickey didn't think he had the inside men to perform the role that he wanted them to perform, and you had two of your sort of leading central players thrown into that job. So from that point of view, I think it will getting all the pieces to fit and maybe bringing as much of that defensive stability and security as they had over the last few years. That is the key thing. And Conor McKenna will be very interesting too. You know, absolutely standout underage talent, and his talent translated to the AFL for the most part. Like, he was a real sort of style footballer over there. He's very, like, off the cuff, it seemed. and he came back last year and he had a very good impact in the couple of league matches he played, and maybe didn't go as well for him in the championship then, but I think Dick's right. All of those fellas into the same team in a way that the team still functions is going to be the challenge for them.
And Dick, from what you know of kind of the scene up in Tyrone, like was it a popular move to bring in a new management team after all the years Mickey Hart was there? Did supporters and Tyrone football people did they want to change?
There was just been going on this 5 or 6 years, and probably even before that. That's as the saying goes, familiarity breeds contempt, and they're such a passionate, like they're rabid passionate, GA people up there, and there's such competitiveness in the club scene, and there's so many guys that have the potential to play county football. And when guys aren't being accommodated, or you see guys they're taking a year out, that's their own club will rally around them and sort of then blame somebody else, and all that sort of stuff was going on. You could 20 test cases or case studies around that. So yes, time was right for change, and I think everyone would accept that. Now, far away fields are green and all that, and if the 3 guys, or many of them's involved in the management team up there, don't get off to a good start, the pitchforks will be out fairly quickly, because the reality is up there, they want success. They got used to winning All-Ireland titles and everything there, and they want to be back up at that level. They feel they have the talent, they have the resources, they have the infrastructure, that everything that's there. So they'll want a quick return. And, Mickey Hart brought an awful lot of consistency. You can't put a price on that consistency and knowledge of your players and what makes them tick. And equally, did he see something that others didn't, in terms of, listen, these guys just aren't good enough to let them off the leash. If we want to be competitive and get to All-Ireland finals, this is what we have to do with the players that we have. It's not the Brian McGuigans, the Muggsies, the Peter Cadamans, the Stephen O'Neills. That's not what we have. But maybe Fergal Logan and Dooher can get more out of them. So it'll be very interesting. But listen, they'll not get too long a honeymoon period, because they don't do that up in Tyrone.
Yeah, if they lose to Donegal this weekend, even, I'm sure there'll already be some questions. And Donegal, if you just look down the division into Division 2, Mayo down outside the top flight for the first time, I think, over 20 years. They got to the All-Ireland final last year, but there doesn't seem to be a sense that people are still like really excited or talking about them. They had a lot of retirements, albeit players who hadn't really featured in the championship. Like, I suppose James Horan, to be fair to him, kind of got to a final while still rebuilding the team. So he does seem to they have the team kind of, at least a bit further along in the development than people might have thought.
Yeah, I don't think that James Horan would have come back if he thought he had to solely rely on the group that he had sort of left behind him after the 2014 semi-final defeat in Limerick to Kerry. I think he had an idea that there was a good crop coming through, and we saw a little bit of that last year. Oisin Mullen was obviously the standout one, but for the most part, I thought Owen McLaughlin had a very good year as well. And they have sort of managed to, on the hoof, they've managed to replace the likes of Keith Higgins, who've moved on, because those fellas are very similar in style. I won't just say they're at Keith's level yet, but they're very similar in style, and that they're very dynamic, and they love going forward, and they play on the front foot. I think you're right in saying they did rebuild in the hoof. It maybe in some ways Division 2 will give them a chance to sort of experiment a little bit more. I still think that group is very they're in with Meath, Down and Mayo, I think. And it's like we said already, we're repeating ourselves, but it could be 6 days between matches, and all of a sudden you're looking over your shoulder. So I think Mayo in a fairly good spot. They'll have an awful lot of work to do to come out of Connacht, because there's some good sides in there, Roscommon and Galway. The Aidan O'Shea thing is interesting. They're sort of vague about the injury he's suffered. Not really expecting to see him in the league, I don't think. So if he's not available, who did it turn to? What's the contingency plan there? I just think they still have an awful lot of raw materials. Mayo, they have loads of the experience, but at the same time, I was covering last year's All-Ireland final. I think they were a point down at the water break, if the second half water break, if memory serves. But I didn't feel like I felt like the game was done. I thought the last 15 or 20 minutes where Dublin were just in charge, and they weren't ever going to give Mayo the oxygen to get back in the game. So you do wonder about, is the All-Ireland final appearance, and given the structure of the competition, does that automatically put them as next in line to Dublin in terms of contenders right now at the minute? I don't know. That might give you a bit of a false read. Like, they're still in the shake-up, absolutely, but for me, Dublin were the best team in the country last year by a stretch, and they had been the best team in the country by a stretch for the last while. I don't really feel like there was anyone close to them last year, and I'm not sure, Kerry, that anyone can maybe close that gap this year.
Yeah, Dick, how would you assess that young cohort that James Horan has that he's going to go to battle with this year?
Yeah, I think the dropping down into Division 2 might actually suit them, that they don't have to really worry too much about pitching themselves up at that level, and they can just focus on coming out the right side of what is a relatively good Connacht draw, so they can almost plan to be in the mix at the business end of the season, and use the league, use the early rounds of the Connacht Championship to give younger players more game time, because they have to find more. They can't be keeping going back to the well. They have to find and give confidence and game time to younger forwards and players that can push them up a wee bit more, because they're still a 3, 4, 5 point team off Dublin on most days. So they have to find that, as Donnchadh said, they were just missing that X factor going down the home straight that give you the confidence that they might be able to turn Dublin over. So listen, he found a couple of those players last year, the likes of Oisin Mullen and McLaughlin, so that they'll need to young Conroy, so they need to bring them on and see can they find another couple of players to bring them on a wee bit. So I think looking at the way the league is, and so they've got 3 league games that they should be able to win those maybe in 3rd or 4th gear. Not disingenuous, the teams are there, but they should be. And then they've got, I think, a Sligo, and then possibly is it who else is in the next? Just looking at the. Yes, got Leitrim. Yeah, so, and not to be disingenuous to any of those teams, James Horn will be looking at it, that's not a bad way to prep now. Maybe the only fear would they might be a wee bit cold by the time they get to a Connacht final. But if you're sitting back looking at your calendar, he says, yeah, that's not a bad way to be ramping up, as opposed to maybe some of the Ulster teams that we talked about having to be hitting everything from the go over the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, and Mayo have had such helter-skelter league campaigns over the last 10 odd years. It seems to go down to the final day. Maybe a slightly less taxing one, might pay dividend in the championship. Just to finish off, guys, you might quickly look at Division 3. You have 2 provincial champions from last year, Cavan in Division 3 North with Derry, Longford and Fermanagh, and then Tip in Division 3 South with Limerick, Wicklow and Offaly. Donnchadh, do you think either of those teams, do you think they can build on last year and have another good run in the league or the championship, or was it kind of just a weird year and they had a great result? How do you look at that?
I think they have to build. I think goal number 1 for them will be getting out of 3. I think they've Cavan in particular a very interesting one, because I suppose going into last year you would have said that they're missing 1 or 2 of their better players, and Darren McVeety in particular was a couple of times they went to Division 1. I thought he was the one player really stood up to that level of football. The couple of times I saw them, I did a few who could all operate, but I thought McVeety was a very important player for them, and that they came back and won without him was fairly significant for them. I think they should have enough to get out of Division 3. They are a bit of a snake pit, those divisions, 2 and 3, 4. All the managers will tell you every time you talk to them, all the teams are so close to each other, and the league is so important that getting promoted out of them is a very difficult thing to do, because you have to beat 3 or 4 in a normal year. You have to beat probably 4 or 5 teams who are at your level, and you have to beat them all within the space of 6 weeks, 7 weeks maybe. So it's a very hard thing to do, to perform to that level all the time. I think Cavan should have enough to come out of it. Tipperary maybe slightly different. Obviously, very good group of players, but they're always feel like their panel is a little bit shallower than the teams they're operating against. A very strong 15, maybe even 17. But after that, they're sort of maybe a little bit vulnerable to injuries in Tipperary. But you would think that based on last year's form, they would have enough to. They would have enough to come out of it.
Yeah, and Dick, is there any other teams looking across the lower divisions that you're interested to see, if they can get a promotion push and maybe kick on from there?
Yeah, I think, okay, less Division 3. Derry, like I hear, there's a bit, I do a bit of work up around Derry, and there's a bit more positivity around the structures and what they're trying to do up there. So again, like Tyrone, people don't appreciate how fanatical these counties are about their football and how strong their club units are. And if they can get their act together, they're better than the Division 3 team. Do you know what I mean? The raw material is there. They just can never find the ingredients. So I'd say they'd be looking at a good Division 3 campaign and then setting themselves up for a big game, likely against Donegal, potentially at home as well. The thing you'll always find about Division 3 teams, and Monaghan were there, they might never beat a Division 1 team, right? The gap's too far. But they can take out a Division 2 team that might have the potential to beat a Division 1 team, if that makes sense. So, a Derry could beat a Donegal in Celtic Park in the Ulster Championship. They'll not beat a Dublin, right? That's not the conversation. But in the same way as Cavan took out Donegal last year, Cavan were never going to beat a Dublin or a top-tier team. You would have felt Donegal probably could have. So that's where these teams can have a big impact in terms of the All-Ireland conversation. They can take out a team above them that might have an influence further up. So I'm looking at Derry. Cavan will have a big part to play insofar as they need to bounce back. They need to show that it wasn't just a one-hit wonder last year. So there'll be a bit of pressure on those. Tipperary, listen, we're always very quick to write off Tipperary. They play with a lovely open style, natural footballers. They'll come out of that Division 3. I don't see them in trouble there. The problem is they're just going to hit Kerry in a Munster Championship. So they could have a short year. So loads of talent there. And but listen, I'm just sort of keeping a watchful eye on Derry if they show a wee bit that they could have a wee say later on in the summer. Other than that, it's hard to see because there's a lot of flux and change in a lot of the lower counties, and it's to see can they get a wee bit of form and maybe have a wee bit of a summer ahead of them.
Yeah, well, a few storylines and a few teams to look out for there. And I suppose after hurling getting the showcase last week, it's good to be back talking football. Dick, Donnchadh, thanks so much for joining me. That's all we have time for this week on the Tyrone in association with Allianz. Thank you for listening. We'll be back next week reviewing all the hurling and football action. In the meantime, you can subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, or listen on independent.ie. So until next time, thanks for listening and goodbye.
Allianz, supporting all 32 counties through the Allianz Leagues.